The first time the galaxy truly noticed humanity was not when their ships pierced the void, but when one of their worlds refused to die quietly. Earth burned under Vorlith assault. Its skies fractured by bioluminescent warforms that blotted out the sun. Yet the planet answered with defiance instead of surrender. From the shattered command center beneath the ruins of Geneva, Commander Alara Voss stood before a cracked holographic map. Her uniform scorched, her eyes unyielding. She had lost half her fleet in 3 hours, her homeworld in 3 days, and still her voice never trembled as she issued orders that kept millions alive for minutes longer. Across the stars, Ambassador Kale Thren of the Alvari Collective watched the feed with mounting unease. His species valued harmony, precision, and calculated withdrawal. Humanity displayed none of those virtues. They fought like wounded animals cornered by extinction, improvising tactics faster than Concord analysts could process them. Kale Thren had been assigned as humanity's liaison only weeks earlier, a formality extended to a minor power expected to collapse. Instead, he found himself witnessing a species that treated hopeless odds as a personal insult. Alara knew the Concord was watching, measuring humanity's worth in casualty projections and resource curves. She also knew they would not intervene unless survival seemed profitable. That knowledge hardened her resolve. Humanity had begged for allies before. Now they would earn them. She ordered a counterstrike that logic rejected, sending crippled destroyers on a flanking burn that exposed Earth's last orbital shield. It was a gamble born of instinct rather than doctrine, and it worked. The Vorlith hesitated, confused by a move no rational species would attempt. In the council chambers light years away, Kale Thren felt a chill ripple through his fronds. The ancient prophecy resurfaced in his thoughts, a relic he had dismissed as myth during his early studies. It spoke of a young species, fractured and fierce, that would become the galaxy's singular danger. Watching Alara sacrifice ships to save strangers, he wondered if danger was too small a word. Humanity did not merely resist annihilation, they challenged it, as if daring the universe to do its worst. When Kale Thren requested a direct channel, Alara accepted without ceremony. Their first conversation was brief, strained, and brutally honest. He asked why humanity continued fighting when defeat was inevitable. She replied that inevitability was a luxury of observers, not participants. As long as one city stood, one ship flew, or one child breathed, surrender was impossible. Her answer unsettled him more than any battlefield report. It revealed a worldview where survival was secondary to meaning. The Vorlith adapted quickly, redirecting their swarm toward Earth's population centers. Casualty estimates climbed into the billions. Alara authorized evacuations she knew would fail, buying time with human lives because there was no other currency left. Each decision carved deeper lines into her face, yet she carried them all, refusing to pass the weight to anyone else. Leadership, she believed, meant owning the cost. Kale Thren began to argue for intervention within the Concord, his words shaking centuries of doctrine. He spoke of courage that defied probability and compassion that weaponized sacrifice. Many dismissed him, but few listened, and that was enough to fracture consensus. Humanity was forcing the galaxy to choose, just as the Vorlith forced humanity to stand. As Earth's night side flared with fresh bombardment, Alara transmitted a final status report. "We are still here," she said simply. The message carried no plea, only a statement of fact. Kale Thren realized then that the prophecy had never been a warning about destruction alone. It was about resolve, about a species that would not accept the universe's indifference. And as the feed cut to static, he feared that whatever survived this war would be forever changed. In the depths beneath the ruined city, civilians listened to distant impacts and clung to whispered promises that humanity had always made itself. Endure today, rebuild tomorrow. Alara paused alone for a heartbeat, allowing herself to feel the grief she hid from her crews, then sealed away and returned to the fight. Kale Thren, watching that solitary moment through imperfect sensors, understood that humanity's true strength lay not in their weapons, but in their willingness to carry unbearable pain without surrendering compassion. The central conflict crystallized before him with terrible clarity. If humanity fell, the galaxy would lose more than a war. If humanity endured, everything would have a change. That realization compelled him to remain at his console long after others turned away, because the story unfolding was no longer about Earth alone, but about whether courage could redefine survival itself. The war had only begun, and both knew the next choices would determine not merely victory or defeat, but the soul of the galaxy itself for generations yet unborn. Earth's resistance forced the war into a slower, crueler phase, one measured not by territory gained but by exhaustion endured. Commander Alara Voss slept in fragments, minutes stolen between alarms, her dreams crowded with burning skies and unfinished orders. Each time she woke, she chose resolve over despair, knowing her composure shaped the morale of millions she would never meet. To falter publicly would be to concede defeat privately. Ambassador Kael'thran arrived in the Sol system aboard a Concord envoy vessel stripped of weapons, a symbolic gesture meant to convey neutrality. The irony was not lost on him as Vorlith's shadows drifted beyond the heliosphere, indifferent to symbolism or restraint. He came not as a savior, but as a witness tasked with determining whether humanity warranted salvation. That burden weighed heavier than any armor. Their second meeting occurred via secure link, while evacuation corridors collapsed across Earth. Ilara's image flickered, smeared with static and ash, yet her gaze remained direct. Kael'thran asked about her people, not their fleets or strategies, and the question surprised her. She spoke of farmers turned pilots, teachers turned medics, and children who learned to pack emergency kits before they learned multiplication. Her voice softened only once, when she mentioned her sister, lost during the first orbital breach. Kael'thran listened, recording nothing. For the first time, he abandoned analytical detachment and allowed empathy to guide him. Humanity's contradictions became clearer through Alara's words. They were capable of staggering violence, yet anchored by fierce attachment. They destroyed with one hand and rebuilt with the other, never seeing the conflict between the two. It was not hypocrisy. It was survival shaped into instinct. The Vorlith pressed inward, adapting to human unpredictability by overwhelming scale. Cities vanished beneath living tides, and the stars themselves seemed to recoil. Alara authorized Operation Lastlight, a defensive stand intended to shield evacuation convoys at any cost. The plan was brutal, requiring volunteer crews to hold collapsing lines until their ships were consumed. When the call went out, the response channels flooded instantly. Watching the volunteers assemble broke something in Kael'thran. These humans did not display fanaticism or blind obedience. They laughed, argued, and exchanged keepsakes before boarding doomed vessels. They chose sacrifice with clear eyes, not because they were ordered, but because others needed time. Kael'thran realized the Concord had misjudged humanity's defining trait. It was not aggression, but choice. During the battle, Alara remained on an exposed command platform, refusing relocation to hardened bunkers. She believed distance dulled accountability. As reports of losses streamed in, she acknowledged each one, speaking the names aloud, anchoring herself to the cost of her decisions. Kael'thran observed this ritual in silence, understanding that leadership for humans was not abstraction, but personal reckoning. When Operation Lastlight succeeded, millions escaped Earth's gravity well, but the price was staggering. The skies cleared only because so many ships were gone. In the quiet aftermath, Alara finally allowed herself to sit, her hands shaking beyond control. Kael'thran addressed the Concord Council that same hour, his voice resonant with urgency he had never shown before. He argued that neutrality in the face of such courage was complicity in annihilation. The Council deferred, bound by fear and precedent, yet fractures appeared in their unity. Small powers began rerouting aid. Observers became participants. Humanity had not asked for this shift, but they had earned it through suffering made visible. Alara received word of the partial support and responded with a simple acknowledgement, neither grateful nor resentful. Survival left little room for pride. As the Vorlith regrouped beyond the system's edge, a fragile pause settled over the war. Alara and Kael'thran shared one final exchange before the next phase began. He warned that greater horrors were coming. She replied that humanity had always met the future unprepared, and survived regardless. When the channel closed, both understood that the conflict had transformed from a fight for Earth into a test of the galaxy's conscience. The next choices would demand more than endurance. They would demand belief. That belief remained fragile. easily broken by the scale of what loomed ahead. Ilera reviewed casualty lists alone, forcing herself to remember faces instead of numbers, because forgetting felt like a second death. Caelthran, returning to his silent quarters, questioned every assumption his people held sacred, realizing that survival without solidarity was merely prolonged extinction. Beyond the system, the Vorlith waited, learning, adapting, patient in their hunger. The pause was not mercy but preparation. Humanity had earned attention, not safety, and the galaxy stood on the edge of a choice it could no longer postpone. What followed would test whether courage inspired unity, or whether fear would fracture the stars beyond repair, leaving every species to face darkness alone, without excuses, witnesses, or absolution, for generations yet unborn. The fragile pause shattered when the Vorlith returned, not in reckless waves, but with chilling precision. They struck supply routes first, severing lifelines humanity had barely secured, forcing Ilera Voss to confront an enemy that had learned patience. The war shifted from desperate defense to calculated erosion, and every loss now felt intentional, designed to sap resolve rather than overwhelm force. Ilera adapted as she always had, by refusing predictability. She ordered scattered counteractions that defied strategic symmetry, keeping the Vorlith uncertain but stretching her own forces thin. Each decision isolated her further, not from her people, but from rest. Command weighed heavier as victories grew rarer, and the cost of every mistake multiplied. She began to understand that endurance alone would not be enough. Caelthran remained embedded with human command, no longer a distant observer, but an uneasy participant. He relayed Concord intelligence, often delayed or incomplete, and watched how Ilera filled the gaps with intuition shaped by loss. Where other commanders sought certainty, she embraced ambiguity, trusting human adaptability over rigid doctrine. This unnerved Caelthran, yet he could not deny its effectiveness. The turning discovery came quietly, almost overlooked amid constant alarms. Human analysts noticed irregularities in Vorlith response times, moments of hesitation that followed particularly erratic human actions. Ilera seized on the pattern, pressing her scientists for answers even as battles raged. The conclusion unsettled everyone. The Vorlith were not merely adapting. They were struggling to predict behavior driven by emotion rather than optimization. This revelation forced Ilera to confront a moral precipice. Humanity's greatest strength, their capacity for irrational compassion, was also their sharpest weapon. To exploit it fully meant embracing sacrifice on a scale that bordered on self-annihilation. She wrestled with the thought in silence, aware that leadership sometimes demanded choosing which part of one's soul to preserve. Caelthran sensed a shift before Ilera spoke of it. When she finally shared the theory, he recoiled at its implications. The Concord prized preservation above all else. Deliberate sacrifice violated centuries of ethical constraint. Yet as he watched humans volunteer again and again without coercion, he realized their ethics were built differently. Choice, freely given, altered the equation. The next engagement tested the theory brutally. Ilera authorized a feint designed to appear chaotic even by human standards, drawing Vorlith forces into a trap fueled by apparent desperation. Ships transmitted open communications, fragments of human music, and farewell messages bleeding into space. The Vorlith faltered, their coordination fracturing under data they could not parse. Victory followed, narrow and costly, but undeniable. For the first time, a Vorlith node collapsed entirely, leaving inert husks drifting where a living intelligence had been moments before. The battlefield fell silent in disbelief. Ilera felt no triumph, only a hollow ache for the lives spent proving the theory correct. Caelthran reported the outcome to the Concord, framing it not as a tactic, but as a warning. Humanity's unpredictability was reshaping the war, forcing the enemy into vulnerability. The Council reacted with fear, thinly veiled as caution. A species capable of weaponizing emotion challenged every assumption of controlled conflict. In private, Caelthran confronted Ilera, questioning how far she was willing to go. She answered without hesitation that she would go as far as her people chose to follow. Command to her was not authority, but alignment. If humanity decided survival required unbearable cost, her role was to stand with them, not above them. As Vorlith forces withdrew to reassess, another pause settled over the war, heavier than the last. Humanity had found a way to hurt their enemy, but at a price that threatened to redefine who they were. Illyra stared at the stars, wondering whether victory achieved through such means would leave anything worth saving. Kael'thren shared her unease, recognizing that the prophecy's shadow loomed closer. Humanity was becoming the axis upon which the war turned, and the next choice would demand not only courage, but a reckoning with what it meant to win. The final phase began without ceremony, as most human endings did, announced only by a quiet shift in readiness and a tightening of resolve. Illyra Voss gathered her remaining commanders and spoke plainly, stripping the moment of rhetoric. The Vorlith had withdrawn not in defeat, but in calculation, consolidating around a central nexus whose destruction could end the war decisively. Reaching it would require everything humanity had left. Silence followed her briefing, not from fear, but comprehension. Every officer understood the implication. There would be no retreat, no second attempt. Illyra watched their faces, memorizing them, knowing she would not see many again. When she dismissed them, she remained alone, allowing herself a single breath of doubt before sealing it behind duty. Kael'thren observed preparations with a weight that bent his posture. He had argued for caution, for alternatives, but there were none that did not belong suffering across a galaxy. Humanity's willingness to bear the burden had cornered everyone else into moral clarity. If this failed, the Concord would inherit responsibility for letting them try. The assault began with controlled chaos. Human fleets advanced in fragmented vectors, broadcasting conflicting signals, layered with emotional noise the Vorlith could not filter. Illyra coordinated from a forward command vessel, choosing proximity over safety. She needed to feel the battle, to sense its rhythm, trusting intuition where instruments lagged. Losses mounted immediately. Ships vanished in flares of light, their sacrifices opening corridors only briefly before closing again. Illyra acknowledged each report, voice steady, hands clenched beneath the console. Kael'thren stood beside her, recording nothing, bearing witness to a resolve that bordered on the unbearable. As they neared the nexus, Vorlith resistance intensified, adaptive responses accelerating beyond prediction. For a moment, doubt pierced Illyra's certainty. She wondered whether they had finally reached the limit of human defiance. Then a civilian vessel, long presumed lost, surged forward, its engines overloaded, clearing a path no military craft could have survived. The choice reignited her resolve. Humanity pressed on, bleeding momentum into progress. Illyra ordered the final sequence, initiating the core disruption that would collapse the Vorlith intelligence network. The energy draw threatened to consume her own fleet, and she knew it. She authorized it anyway, her voice calm, almost gentle. Kael'thren felt the moment stretch into something sacred. The galaxy held its breath as humanity gambled existence on a singular act of will. When the surge detonated, space itself seemed to recoil. The Vorlith screamed without sound, their cohesion unraveling into silence. The battlefield felt eerily still. Debris drifted where an enemy once loomed, and for a heartbeat, Illyra believed they had paid too much. Her sensors flickered, systems failing, and she braced the end. Instead, emergency lights steadied, and survival signals bloomed across the void. They had done it. The cost revealed itself slowly, cruelly. Entire fleets were gone. Entire cities would never hear from their defenders again. Illyra closed her eyes, allowing grief to surface at last. Not as weakness, but acknowledgement. Victory did not absolve loss. It honored it. Kael'thren transmitted confirmation to the Concord, his voice altered by awe and sorrow. The war was over, but the galaxy was changed. Humanity had not conquered through dominance, but through refusal to abandon others. That distinction mattered more than any strategic outcome. As recovery operations began, Illyra remained at her station, exhaustion finally seeping into her bones. She wondered what humanity would become after proving such sacrifice possible. Kael'thren shared the question, sensing that survival carried its own burden. The immediate threat was gone, but meaning lagged behind victory. In the quiet that followed, both understood this was not an ending, but a threshold. Humanity had saved the galaxy, yet now stood before an uncertain future shaped by what they had shown themselves capable of enduring. The stars were safe, for now, and the silence invited reflection rather than rest. The aftermath of victory unfolded slowly, as if the galaxy itself needed time to believe the war had truly ended. Commander Alara Voss remained aboard her damaged command vessel, overseeing recovery efforts with the same quiet intensity that had carried her through battle. She spoke little, conserving words as if they were another dwindling resource, yet every order carried care for those who remained. Survival felt heavier than combat, because now there was space to feel. Ambassador Kale Thren stayed close, no longer bound by formal observation. He assisted where he could, translating Concord relief protocols into something humans could use immediately. Watching Alara direct rescue operations, he saw the cost of leadership etched deeper than exhaustion. Victory had not lifted her burden. It had transformed it. She now carried memory instead of fear, and memory was harder to set down. Earth emerged from the shadows, scarred but breathing. Cities lay broken, continents wounded, yet signals rose from shelters and ships, voices confirming life where silence had been expected. Humanity mourned openly, naming the dead, refusing to let sacrifice dissolve into abstraction. Alara insisted on this remembrance, believing the future required honesty about what had been paid for it. Kale Thren addressed the Concord again, not with argument but testimony. He described a species that had chosen shared survival over isolated safety, that had accepted annihilation rather than surrender others to it. His words shifted the tone of the galaxy's response. Aid arrived not as charity, but as partnership, offered with respect rather than caution. Alara stood before a gathering of survivors weeks later, her uniform repaired but her posture unchanged. She spoke without grandeur, acknowledging loss before hope. Humanity, she said, had proven nothing except what they already knew, that they would stand together or not at all. The crowd listened in silence, bound by shared grief and fragile resolve. Reconstruction began unevenly, driven by stubborn ingenuity rather than abundance. Humans rebuilt alongside alien allies, learning cooperation forged in crisis. Kale Thren found himself changed by the process, shedding layers of detachment he once considered virtue. Humanity's influence was subtle but pervasive, reshaping expectations of courage and responsibility across species lines. In private moments, Alara questioned what peace meant for someone forged in unending crisis. She feared stillness more than battle, uncertain how to exist without constant urgency. Kale Thren recognized the same unease in himself, understanding that transformation rarely felt triumphant. They spoke often, finding solace in shared uncertainty rather than answers. The prophecy resurfaced in Concord archives, reinterpreted rather than feared. Humanity was no longer labeled a threat, but a catalyst, a reminder that survival required more than calculation. Alara dismissed the idea when it reached her, uninterested in myth. What mattered was that people lived, and that tomorrow remained possible. As ships departed and systems stabilized, Alara finally returned to Earth's surface. She stood beneath a clearing sky, feeling gravity without alarms, and allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time in years. The world was wounded, but alive, and that was enough to begin again. Kale Thren prepared to leave, his mission complete, yet his perspective irrevocably altered. Before departing, he thanked Alara, not for saving the galaxy, but for showing it a different way to endure. She replied that humanity had simply refused to be alone. Their farewell carried no ceremony, only mutual recognition. The stars no longer burned with immediate threat, but the future remained uncertain, shaped by lessons learned through loss. Humanity stepped forward, not as conquerors or saviors, but as participants in a wider community bound by shared vulnerability. The war had ended, yet its meaning continued to unfold, inviting the galaxy to decide whether courage and compassion would endure when survival was no longer at stake.